graduates of every high school in Norfolk. And specifically, they would list the institutions that those students were going to attend post-graduation. And it sort of inspired me to go into education, because I would look and I would see that the Booker T, Lake Taylor, and Norview valedictorians, salutatorians were going to Norfolk State, Virginia State, joining the military, maybe going to a JMU or a George Mason, but the Maury and the Granby graduates were going to Princeton, Yale, MIT, other schools like that. And and that troubled me, because I was thinking, and I'm looking at it going, there have got to be students from other socioeconomic classes as well as other ethnicities who are qualified to go to those types of institutions. And so one of my missions when I went into education was I wanted to prove that students from Norview, students from Lake Taylor, students from Booker T had the academic acumen and the ability to attend those schools and succeeded at those schools. And so through the Dodson Scholar Program, that's sort of been one of my big remits. And I'm, I think we're making progress. We've got Myles at MIT. We had a guy last year, Kamal, go off to MIT. But if you look at the Norview graduating seniors over the last 5 to 6 years, we're starting to get into the Ivy Leagues. We're starting to get into the UVAs. And I think that, that trend is a positive and productive trend, because when I first came to Norfolk, I couldn't even get schools to apply to those schools, let alone matriculate to those schools. And so I'm really happy to see the youth taking on the challenge of disproving people's erroneous negative perceptions of and or artificial limitations on our ceiling as far as academic ability goes.
Thank you, Commander. And one more introductory question for the panel before we open the conversation to the audience. What goal do you have in mind? What goal do you have in mind to accomplish by the end of this discussion?
Okay, I'll jump in. You said by the end of this discussion, right?
Yes. What goal do you have in mind to accomplish?
To hear from young people on what they believe concrete steps I should take to help to make things better for the youth of Norfolk.
Thank you.
I would say maybe we can inspire some of the folks on this call to run for office themselves someday, to get more engaged, to come to city council and school board meetings. We need your voices there.
I'll chime in at this point. And just as I stated a little while ago, I think having the input of the young people is very important at this point in time. And my hope is that by the time this conversation ends, is that I have a better perspective of where you all are as far as what myself as a policeman, us as a department need to do to help make your lives better. How can we change in a positive way so that your lives will be better than what people feel their lives are right now?
And then I guess I would add that, for me, I hope to come out of this with an understanding of the issues and concerns that the youth have regarding race and other issues in Norfolk, but also to hopefully inspire people to want to make a difference and be willing to take that first step. Understanding that change is a gradual process, and at the end of the day, whether you're making change at the local level or at a national level, you have to attack it at all levels, and just hope that students walk away from this willing to be engaged in the conversation and engaged in the mission of making the nation a better place.
To add on to that, I think it kind of relates to what Mr. Jordan had said earlier. At the end of the day, you can always sign bills, make laws, sign legislation, but those are really symbolic victories. I think a true victory to true racial equality or equity is actually starting the conversation about this. I know race has a very provocative or it evokes a lot of emotion, whether it be good or bad. And because of that, some people like to stray away from this topic, but I feel like that does more harm than good, because it's kind of sweeping a mess under a rug. I hope from this discussion we can start this conversation, have it like at the forefront of at least Norfolk residents' minds, so we could truly establish change in the community.
All right, and to add on to that, what Myles was saying, to me, the goal of this discussion is to inspire other discussions, whether it's about Black Lives Matter or about other communities, LGBT, whatever it is that people may be passionate about, because social media has played a big part in sharing information, getting the word out there, letting people know what's actually going on in our communities. But I feel that anyone can get on their phone, tweet out, put a hashtag, but I feel real change happens when you're able to actually go out, talk to people, and inspire change in your communities. Actually get actions done, and not because people will be able to hear your voice eventually, but actions speak louder than words. It's the age-old adage that people always say, and if we can get people to more so use their actions instead of just, because using social media not necessarily isn't a bad thing, but we could use social media as a catalyst to support our actions as we talk with one another, we interact with one another.
Adding on to that, yeah, me and Jeffrey, when we be on social media and we would see, like the death of George Floyd, or we see people talk about Breonna Taylor's death, we enjoyed seeing people discuss about it. However, everyone's aware of the issues in the community and in the nation as a whole, and I feel like we need to take a step past awareness and to do action, to actually, go out, talk to people, sign petitions. We need to solve the issues. Everyone's aware of them now, but now it's time to solve them. And if that's all the panelists that, I have a question from one of the, you guys can, as the audience, you guys can submit your questions now. I have a question from one of the audience members who'd like to stay anonymous. She asks, as a panelist, what are you doing about the gentrification of lower income neighborhoods in Norfolk that are predominantly Black?
Okay, Mr. Jordan. We have an ongoing discussion about this one. You want to give some history to it?
No, you go right ahead. I'll jump in.
Listen, it's a huge issue. And we have a long history of redlining here in Norfolk. And it's not something that we should be proud of, and we have to address it head on, and we haven't done a very good job of that. And I made reference to Rodney. He's provided me and all of us with a lot of research. As you know, we're in the process right now of addressing the St. Paul's development. And there's a lot of concern that's right, a good concern as it should be, that we are taking folks who live in these public housing areas, and we're going to take them down. They're going to have nowhere to live. There's also a lot of misinformation about that too. I'm not specifically, I don't co-chair that committee. My colleagues, Angela Williams-Graves and Paul Riddick do, but I think it's something that everybody should be aware of. And you need to keep the city council and the mayor honest on the promises that we have made through our People's First program to ensure that everybody's got a place to live that's safe and that's affordable, and that we are using the workforce in Norfolk, and we're working with the local community to rebuild that area. And I think that's been a big issue that I know Mr. Jordan has been concerned about, that we have outsourced a lot of our work to places outside of this area. And we need to make sure that we're hiring folks from within here as we rebuild that. But gentrification going forward, it's a balancing act. We want to improve these communities, but we don't want to price out people. So for example, right now we're spending $120 million over in Chesterfield Heights and Grandy Village. And the people who live in Chesterfield Heights, it was a federal grant, by the way, to improve the stormwater and flood mitigation over there, which is going to be great for that neighborhood. But the concern is, does it price the folks who live there out of the neighborhood? Will they be able to afford their taxes, et cetera? So we've got to proactively address that with, but I think our treasurer, Daun, I don't know if you can hear us now, but this would be a great place for you, for what you've done in Norfolk in the background, and talk about taxes, et cetera. I don't know if you can address a portion of that. And I know that Rodney, you could probably jump in and talk about this for the rest of the time.
I can hear, but I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Can hear you.
Yeah, I still think you're going in and out. Y'all may want to send Miss Hester the dial-in number.
Okay, that's better this time. Well, let's see how far I can get. And I won't talk long. I died.
Miss Hester, it cut out again.
Yeah.
I did dial in. So I'm.
All right. I'll text her. She may still be dialing in through her Wi-Fi. But just to add, I think the question about gentrification requires really some understanding and discussion about what definition we're using for it. A lot of times the word gentrification gets used to talk about predominantly Black communities or communities of color being displaced as white residents move in. I think Ms. McClellan was talking about some of that, but then also talked about what happens when a neighborhood has a certain economic mix. And then as a result of government action or other action, the dynamics change and then people get priced out of the neighborhood. But I often find that we typically, when the conversation of gentrification comes up, is really talking about a historically African-American neighborhood being replaced by whites moving in. In Norfolk, we have a history through the bulldozer of displacing African-Americans. So East Ghent, Robin Hood Apartments, let's see, Broad Creek, Liberty Park. You can go down the line, East Beach, where communities that were considered to be distressed, and I believe often allowed to become distressed intentionally, and then when they become valuable, they're bulldozed and African Americans are displaced. I've had the opportunity to work in Park Place. We developed a healthy neighborhood approach where we've tried to be intentional about resident leadership and engagement, working with police, working with the city, and are looking at ownership structures so that as a neighborhood improves, if the residents of that neighborhood, even if they individually cannot own something, that there could be some structures that allow for community ownership or stockholder ownership that then allows for wealth to stay within the community and for individuals to benefit as communities improve. But there's a lot loaded there. I do think Norfolk has a very poor history of what we call Negro removal. And I feel we still are dealing with that today and can do a lot better to make sure that we're providing neighborhoods of opportunity for all people and not just for some people.
All right, thank you. Myles, you said someone asked you a question?
Yes, a member of the audience asked a question. I'll meet him right now.
Hey, this question's more directed to Mr. Daryl Howard. And it's kind of a silly question, but it was just something I read earlier in the pilot today. I'm white, and so I haven't been affected by police, like people of color. But and I've never imagined police in Norfolk is overly policing and is violent. But I was reading this article in the pilot that talked about how Norfolk police in particular, they do not reside in Norfolk. They fall about 20% of Norfolk police officers actually live in the city. And that falls short of the national average of like 44% as conducted by this 2014 study. And the article was basically portraying that contributes to Norfolk police, not caring about the city as much. Because if you live in the city, you're going to care about it more. Because those are going to be the people you see. And I just wanted to, hear your thoughts on that. And, maybe you'll lead that down your train of thought. Thank you.
Very good question. Thank you. And I can tell you that I do not live in the city of Norfolk. However, I have a lot of roots. I have a lot of family that still reside in the city of Norfolk. So even when I'm away from the job, I'm still spending quite a bit of time within the city. I think it would be very irresponsible for me to say that I think that that particular element of officers not living within the city of Norfolk has anything to do with the relationship. That would be foolish of me to think that. I think that it absolutely has something to do with it. Number one, when you are constantly in a particular area, the likelihood that you're going to come into contact with anybody, whether it be citizens, city workers, visitors from another area, is going to be very high. It's oftentimes not very easy for someone who does not have some type of familial base within the city of Norfolk to really comment about the city as a resident, or, you know, a place to come for enjoyment purposes, or even a place for employment. So I think that once we have more people in that position where, yes, I live in the city of Norfolk and I'm able to talk on it from a personal standpoint, I think that is something that would certainly help not only the department itself, but also the entire city. I can tell you that there are some things that we try to talk about sometimes that may be incentives to have officers live within the city. Some of these things are done with other organizations, and those are things that we continue to work on. So I certainly do think that that is a very important factor.
Thank you. And I have another question for you, Mr. Howard, from the audience. As a member of the police force and also being a person of color, how has the recent events affected you?
Wow, excellent question. The short answer is it has really opened my eyes. I am, like you said, I'm a Black male. I do have children, one of which is a son who's 16. And so a lot of my thoughts went straight to him. And when you think about some of the things that are going on, that's part of what drives me. I want to make this world better so that he, just like you all, can have a better place to live, can walk down the street without worry of being stopped because you, quote unquote, seem out of place or you seem suspicious. As a police officer, I was disgusted. I really was. There are some things that, regardless of how much I wear this uniform, that I personally cannot tolerate. And seeing what happened to Mr. Floyd, seeing what's happened to Ms. Taylor and so many others, every time an incident like that occurs, it takes a piece out of my heart. And that is what drives me, because I too have fallen victim to that over the years. I'm not immune to it. So I know how it feels, and it's something that I will die continuing to try to improve.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Myles, are you receiving a question?
Yeah, I have a question from the audience. So this was on the previous topic about police officers living in Norfolk, and a member of the audience asked, can the city motivate police officers to live in Norfolk? Could there be, for instance, a city tax break or other mechanism?
The simple answer is yes, that there are a number of ways that the city could entice people to live within the city of Norfolk who want to work on the police department. It's just a matter of it being the right type of program and at the right time. But again, those are talks that we have been having, and I'm very hopeful that at some point in the near future, we will be able to take steps to make those programs a reality.
Hey, Myles, and Eric, can I jump in? Not specific to that, and I think that article is a great article. I think I would encourage everybody to read to the very end, because it talks about some of those incentives we have tried in the past, which unfortunately have not been successful. I would love to hear, because there are a lot of students on here. I see some educators. I yesterday had a great conversation with Virginia Organizing about the role of SROs, student resource officers, and there's some discussion in some cities about removing SROs or not. And I would be really curious. We've got a school board member here, and just, so as I understand it, there's an MOU between the school system and Norfolk Police, and that MOU has to be reinstated now as of July 1st. There's a new law. It has to be reinstated every 2 years. It hasn't been reinstated for 6 years in Norfolk. And we don't actually have any sort of data from those SROs. What are the students on here? What are your feelings? I would just, and then I'd ask the school board and the educators if I can be so bold, because I don't know. I'd like to know.
I'd actually like to speak on this. So the officer we have at Norview, I haven't really interacted with him much, but we actually invited him to the panel, but he was busy. To be honest, I feel like they're necessary in keeping the schools safe. Norview, sometimes we have, a little instance where the students get rowdy and we need someone there that can protect us. Not necessarily the one we have at Norview, he doesn't over police us. He does keep us safe. And I think that's necessary for all schools. However, I don't think over policing the school is the way to do it. Myles, would you like to add on?
Hold on, I'm trying to take care of the questions.
Oh, you're getting a lot of questions.
Although one of the audience members, Alex Axton, said he could speak on this as a student.
Hey, so on the school resource officers. I've never seen an issue with it, at least in the context of Norview. I've met Officer Williams, outside of school on accident. I met him in school, and he's been a wonderful person. I'm sure there have been bad school resource officers, but from what I've seen of having him in the school, if anything, it's been enjoyable. I mean, from what I understood, I've talked to him, and it seems like he interacts with the students. The students like him, and I'd almost think it casts a different light on what officer is, because he's an enjoyable person to be around. He's funny. I see everybody shaking his hand, saying, "Hey, what's up, Officer Williams?" And I think if anything, he's valuable to have in the school.
Yeah, I'll just add just a little bit to this. So Virginia Organizing, they are friends of mine as well, and I've had some of the similar conversations that Councilwoman McClellan has had. What's at the root of the discussion is there's data out there. So Dr. Martin Luther King talks about the steps to nonviolent social change, and the first step is information gathering or getting the facts. And so what we're dealing with, not just in Norfolk, but across the Commonwealth and in the country, is African-American students, especially males, but a rising number of women as well, who are disproportionately suspended or finding themselves disproportionately engaged with security and discipline issues, which has then led to those students being removed from school or find themselves involved in the criminal justice system. So I think that the conversation around the role of SROs is very important. But what's at a deeper conversation, I think we've talked about already, is really some of these biases that we have as human beings towards one another. I have two daughters who graduated from Norfolk Public Schools. They both graduated from Granby. One daughter is very thin. Another daughter is very hippie. And so one daughter can wear one thing and nobody says a word to her. And another daughter wears the same thing and somebody will approach her. And what we often find is that there's data and research that shows that African-American students are often viewed as more mature than they are. And oftentimes adults tend to approach them in a different way than they would approach their white peers. So the SRO is something that we need to deal with, but there really are some systemic and cultural issues that we need to deal with around that, not to mention to what extent, as I think Eric said earlier, do we believe that it is necessary for some of our schools to be policed to the level that they are? And then even at different levels, high school, very different from middle school and very different from elementary school.
And if I could add just one point to what Mr. Jordan just said, I think it's very important that when you talk about school resource officers, the one thing that we really have to make sure that we do, and that's something that I think will happen as the police department and the school board work together, is making sure that we have the right people in those right positions, should they be determined to be so.
All right, thank you. I don't mean to cut anyone off, but we have a bunch of questions from the audience and we'd like to get to them. Jeffrey, would you like to go?
All right, so this is a question member from Anonymous, and this is directed towards Commander Littlejohn. So coming from your military background, the audience member would like to know how you would feel about, prominent sports members peacefully protesting by kneeling for the flag.
Well, my take on that is real simple. I took an oath to the Constitution, and, at the end of the day, we all have freedom of speech. And, one of the things that we try to do is we try to preserve people's ability to be able to voice their satisfaction and dissatisfaction within the nation. And so my personal take on that is, if you feel a need to take a knee and use that as an expression of your dissatisfaction with a specific thing that's going on with in the country, then more power to you. That's my take.
All right, thank you. And I have a question for Myles right now. So Myles, MIT is a university with a small acceptance rate and an even smaller Black population rate, with only 4% of its population being Black. What is one way you believe we could get more African-American people into these more exclusive universities?
Okay, so I think a way to get more, not only African Americans, but people of color into these universities is, I feel that when it comes to like higher education, there are resources out there that exist, but it's like no one's showing you where the fruit is, like where to find these resources. And I think myself, I've been blessed to have like parents, educators, mentors who help me find my way to get to I don't know, kind of realize my full potential, because I feel like with students of color, there's like this stigma or like a self-imposed belief within themselves that they can't go, either they can't go to college or they can't go to a certain named college. We have this stigma that Harvard is something that's completely unreachable. It's nearly impossible to get into. But I think just first of all, changing that mindset that these are schools that are attainable, I think that's one step towards getting students of color into these universities. Also, I think there's, going off of me also, I've been blessed to be a part of organizations that specifically help students of color and students of lower socioeconomic statuses. I've been a part of scholarship programs called SES Noonan Scholars, Ron Brown Scholars, Jack Kent Cook Scholars. And these organizations have specific missions to reach out to students of color and bring them to higher institutions. But one thing I've noticed is that while these organizations do exist, it's almost like you gotta fish for them, because I think it just happened by luck that I found out about, say, Noonan, because I got a letter in the mail. Some people I've met, they've never heard of scholarship programs like the Gates Scholarship or Jack Kent Cook or Ron Brown. And so I think it's almost like a two-front solution. Like, first, it has to be like the teachers within these schools that have to show these, to expose these students to these resources that are there for them. And also, the responsibility lies on the organizations themselves. A lot of them, they do reach out to different regions, specifically like LA, or in highly populated regions like New York or Boston. But I I know with the Jack Kent Cook Scholarship, I think I was one of only 2 people who in Virginia who got the scholarship. And there was only less than 10 students in Virginia who was a semifinalist. And so not a lot of people know about these scholarships. And so I feel like it's also the responsibility of these organizations to, I don't know, increase or grow their outreach initiatives so that it's not it's not only they're not only reaching out to certain regions, but nationwide.
Thank you. Commander, would you like to speak on this issue as the director for the Dawson Scholars Program at Norview?
Yeah, but the one thing I would add is that I think students need to understand that elite Ivy League schools are destinations, meaning you can't decide as a senior that's where you want to go. You know, you got to decide coming out of middle school, going into high school. You know, I've got 4 children. My oldest went to Dartmouth. It's an Ivy League school. My second oldest graduated from Columbia. That's an Ivy League school. But my kids didn't decide we're going to go Ivy League as seniors. You know, you have to have the credentials, and you got to do things on PSATs and SATs to get on those mailing lists. You know, Myles said he found out about scholarship programs through the mail. Well, those people buy test results. The reason they mailed Myles a letter was his SAT scores and PSAT scores put him in the 99, 98th percentile of the nation. And so I think one of the discussions that students have to have, and one of the things we have to be aware of, is your productivity. How do you get on those lists? How do you put yourself in a position to be competitive? What are the activities? What are the clubs? You know, if you go look at Myles' summers, he spent his summers at Wallops Island doing research projects. He spent his summers at ODU in STEM and research seminars. And so there's a building of a resume that is needed to offset and to make yourself competitive. And I think it's a matter of having dialogue at an early enough age, so that if a student decides this is something that I really want to do, then you got to know these are the things I need to do throughout my high school career. And it's not enough just to be valedictorian. It's not enough just to have a solid SAT. It's about building a competitive resume and understanding what those institutions value. And so to me, it's really about opening those dialogues and helping students understand the gamut of opportunity. And lastly, what I would say is, there are 120, 130 elite schools in America. The problem with most ethnic minorities and people from socioeconomically different backgrounds is we only know the Ivy League. So we say, if I don't get into Harvard, I don't get into Yale, I don't get into Columbia or something like that, then those are the only 8 schools we know. But there are other schools like Hamilton and other institutions that University of Chicago that are just as prestigious from the perspective of corporate America, from the perspective of elite graduate schools, from the perspective of hiring and firing. And we need to expand people's knowledge of those 130, 140 schools, so that if you really want to go to an elite school that's going to open some doors for you, you need to know that there's more than 8 of them available. And it's really about conversation and dialogue and education.
Thank you, Commander.
Okay, another question from the audience was, and this is specifically addressed to Mr. Howard. What's your opinion on defunding the police?
Defunding the police, very interesting question. And there's a lot of talk going around about that right now. And I think it's important to first define what is meant by the phrase defunding the police. When you look at defunding the police, there are some departments that are already out there taking 25, 35% of their budgets away. I think the more appropriate way to handle that would be to redirect funds into some of these things that people are consistently talking about. More training, better training, because once we institute better training for these officers, it's going to make it easier for us to, number one, perform the job at the level that it needs to be across the board, not just here locally, but across the board. I think when you start taking money away in that type of amount, it really starts to handcuff organizations, because I believe what you would be doing essentially is kind of taking away from what they could put towards training, what they could put towards equipment that would, make them better suited for the job today. So I think we have to first decide what level of defunding we want to look at, and then again, look at where that funding is coming from and where it's going. I think allocation is a very big part of it.
May I chime in on that?
Absolutely, Mr. Jordan.
So I have. Let me get your title right now. What's your current rank?
You're talking to me?
Yes.
I am assistant chief.
Assistant chief. Yeah, I knew
Yes,
you got it. I want to make sure I got it right. So I've had the pleasure of working with Assistant Chief Howard on a lot of things over the years, and one of the things I would just add to the conversation around defund the police, and I agree with them in terms of maybe redirect into some areas. But when you look at the data, we have police involvement in neighborhoods that are under stress. So if you these negative interactions that typically occur are in distressed neighborhoods of color. So while I do think we need to have a strategy, as Assistant Chief Howard mentioned, in terms of training in the role of police officers, I also think that we also need to deal with, as I mentioned earlier, having healthy communities and what role government action or inaction plays in that. And so to the extent that as neighborhoods and as communities, we can grow healthier and have less need for police officer engagement, then I think you also lessen the opportunity for some of these negative interactions that we've talked about. But again, I think at a deeper level, we need to deal with how systematic racism and how public policy has created these positions that put police officers in the positions that they're in, and put far too many neighborhoods and people of color having to deal with police officers in a negative way. It doesn't have to be that way, but I think there are many factors that often result in those things occurring, and we need to deal with some of those factors and causes at the root level.
Rodney, I'm going to just chime in real quickly here as well. We've had these conversations about starting at the neighborhood, and I think what's important is oftentimes what we will do from a policy standpoint at City Hall is we'll say, this is what we're going to do to a neighborhood. And we need to start from the bottom up instead of the top down. And we need to be engaging, as Rodney has done such a great job in Park Place, trying to get the neighbors to figure out what they need, help build it themselves, as opposed to us coming in and telling them what to do. Rodney, did I characterize that properly?
I think that's fair, but Ms. Hester, who I know is having Wi-Fi problems, but because when she was on council, her willingness to serve and listen to youth, starting youth council, listening to residents, that afforded the opportunity for this work to happen. I think too often as elected officials, we think we're saviors and we know everything, and so we devalue the assets that exist in communities, and I think in particular with young people.
I'd also like to add, if I could, when we're talking about the engagement with the community, if you look at the Norfolk Police Department for the last several years, we have really turned it up regarding our community engagement. And the point that I want to make behind that is that when we first started that road to going to different civic events, to having the cookouts and forums and things of that nature, I can tell you I had a lot of conversations with people who had the mindset, why are we doing cookouts? I thought we were supposed to put people in jail. And I told them, there's a lot more to policing than putting somebody in jail. A lot of times, you will get much better results from the person that you don't put in jail than from the person that you do put in jail. And case in point, when the incident happened with Mr. Floyd, you saw across the nation, there were so many agencies dealing with riots and all kinds of violence. Someone asked me, why do you think that we have not had those situations here in the city of Norfolk? And I tell them without hesitation, I think the relationships that we have built with our communities and our stakeholders is the reason why we do not have those issues even under such stressful situations. So I applaud Chief Boone and the direction that we have gotten and where we have come with our communities.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. And this is the next question from the audience member. And this is directed towards anyone on the panel. What roles do you think, or actions do you think current young people should take to begin solving these issues?
Well,
I'm sorry, I didn't get the last part of the question.
Oh, excuse me. I'll repeat it. What roles or actions should current young people take to begin solving these problems?
I think we need to reinstitute the great work that Ms. Hester did on City Council, and we need a youth council again. We need a voice at the table advising us